a really amazing topic and really amazing speaker. So, the future of the work isn't just coming, it's already here. To help us decode what's next and how to prepare, let's welcome Lionel Paul David, HR Watertech India, for the Spark Talk on decoding the workplace of future, opportunities and challenges. Get ready for some thought-provoking ideas. So he gonna give you millions of ideas, ladies and gentlemen. All you have to do is just be ready. And any Q&A you have, you can just discuss that at the end of the session. So here's the result-driven HR leader, shaping people's strategies that drive business success and a winning workplace culture. Recognized nationally and internationally for thought leadership and HR excellence. He has been a keynote speaker, panelist, and a podcast host, sharing insights on leadership, talent, HR tech, and the future of work. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Lionel Paul David with a huge round of applause, please.
Thank you. Good evening. Okay, I think Friday you tend to get exhausted, so I'm not going to try patience. So first of all, thanks to HROne for putting together this amazing forum for people to come and connect and discuss ideas. I think the future of HR in itself is shaping in a way where we need to collectively and exhaustively look at different ideas, perspectives for us to be really impactful in what we do. So how many non-HR folks here in this room? Hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so which means that 98.6%, if I use the AI-based camera to analyze, would have told me that's the number of people who are HR professionals here. Okay. How many non-CHROs in the room? Hands up. Non-CHROs. Half means you're halfway there. Yeah, I kind of like that. Okay. So about 80% of you. So the presentation is going to delve into a very macro picture. I would want to structure it in a particular way that it'll have very limited content about HR. Okay, that's the first disclaimer I'm going to make. Okay. The second thing is what I'm trying to decode here for you from this topic is to look at a very macroeconomic picture, okay, at a global level to understand why and what forces are reshaping workplaces. Okay, that's the first thing that we will do. And then we will try to link it back to a little bit of stuff around HR so that you can gain a perspective. Okay. I know we've been a little weak on being interactive on a Friday, but still I'm going to try it nevertheless. How old is the HR department? Not in your organization, but in general. Any educated guesses? How old is the HR department? The clue is in the question. How old is the HR department? There's no negative points. Nobody's going to cut your drinks or take away your dinner plate if you're going to give a wrong answer. It's okay. Somebody put their hand up. 100 years? 30 years. Okay, that's precisely the answer. Okay. HR department in its current avatar is about 30 years. Okay. But the function of HR, because we need to understand our own roots, right? If we don't understand our roots, if we don't understand our past, we cannot connect it to the present and we cannot connect it to the future. Okay, so a little bit of roots for you. Okay, the answer that it's 100 years old is also right, but it is actually older than that. Okay, in its current avatar, it's from early 90s. Okay, where the focus shifted from personal to HR. Okay. So the focus shifted from personnel and IR to HR, which means what got added there is basically looking at organization development and also human capital management, right? So the way we started looking at people as personnel, shifted to looking at them as human capital in the late 80s, number one. And number two, the big shift happening was like the HR leaders who were basically administering a function were asked to now look at how to develop the organization, okay? And that's where early 90s we kind of evolved to actually be called the HR function, okay? Whenever I talk to T.V. Rao, okay, the father of Indian HRD, okay, he fondly traces things back to 1970s, late 1970s, when the first HRD, okay, the human resource development function was set up in India at L&T, okay. So what was happening is that there was some cutting edge work predominantly around organization development that was beginning as a body of work in late 70s and early 80s, okay? And globally also this was what was happening at that point of time. So what was happening much before that is in 50s to personnel and IR, what got added is basically the training function. Until then, HR wasn't responsible for training, okay? So we can keep going backwards to see like, you know, this whole evolution. And the current whole scheme of talking about HR as a business partner came into the scene only at early 2000s, okay? Until then, we weren't expected to be HR business partners, okay? Now, the core of the message that I'm trying to drive here is that despite HR as a business partner at the break of the 21st century, largely the HR function that we have today, the pillars are resting in the way God designed in early 90s. Okay, we are standing on the pillars that were set in early 90s. Why is it important? Because how many of you agree with me that in your organization, you're labeled as a support function? Put your hands up. People perceive HR as a support function. Some exercise. Okay, only few hands went up. Okay, so for the rest of y'all, how are you perceived as? How does your organization perceive HR department? No idea. That's a good answer. What about y'all? How does your organization perceive your HR department?
We deal with a lot of people.
Are you seen as a support function or not? No. And what are you seen as? Okay, we'll talk about it during drinks. What about y'all? Support function. Support function. Business partner, okay. Development, okay, human resource development. Development is a support function or non-support function? Part of management, okay. We'll come to that. Part of business. Lovely, okay, fine. We'll come back to that. How about y'all?
People maintenance department.
People maintenance department. Brilliant. Business enabler. People, culture, and operations. Backbenchers. Drinks are not open till I finish speaking. So speak up. Support function. Enabling function. Okay. People and culture. Okay. So, business partner. Okay. Whatever label we are called, let's be very clear. It's not about what we perceive ourselves to be, but 95% of companies still see HR as support functions only. Only 5% of them see them as an enabling function. Okay? So, what is leading to this optics? What is leading to this disconnect between how we, as professionals, are perceiving ourselves to the way the world is seeing us? Okay? That's something that I want to touch upon during my talk. Okay? So, everyone in an organization generally does not have an opinion on how IT function has to be run, on how finance function has to be run, on how marketing function has to be run, or on how sales function has to be run. But everyone seems to have a perspective on how HR function should be run, right? It's like watching a India match on TV, right? With all the pakoras and vadas and, depending on which part of India you're from, and then you're saying like, how this guy should have really batted, or how he should have held the swing or the line, right? So, armchair criticism. We face a lot of it, true, not true? Yes. Okay. So now why do we face that criticism? Okay. There are broadly 3 factors to it. I'm going to only talk about 2 now, and I will reserve the third one for a little while from now. Everyone inside an organization is mostly an employee first, right? So what happens is that they form strong opinions based on their own personal experiences, plus add to that, okay, the experiences that are narrated in water cooler conversations by their friends and colleagues, okay? So then they tend to have an opinion on how, like the nice, brilliant video Pulkit just played for us, right? Saying like, this is a piece of cake. I don't know why these guys are not responsive. I don't know why they didn't do this. I don't know why this policy is like this, right? So they tend to tell us how this should be managed, right? Second is, at some point of time, with some amount of experience, the workflow in your production or in your sales or in any function, right, and the operating model by itself in the design expects people to manage other people. So they tend to think that from their experience of managing other people, okay, that's all about HR, right? So these are 2 strong basic reasons why people tend to have an opinion as to how HR has to be done. However, while the function of HR has evolved, okay, still the function, irrespective of what you say, right, you automate all this through inbox, through HROne, or like, you have AI-based cameras, or all these nice tools, technologies that are available in plethora to you, you're still expected to address or deliver tough messages to people, okay? The second thing is, you're expected to address sensitive issues, okay? And the third thing is, you're expected to balance between competing interests, right? Because different conflicting interests might emerge and you're expected to kind of manage that show. Now, all these 3 situations, what does it require? It requires diligence. It requires prudence, okay? You cannot just, in a click of a button or in few seconds, right, you cannot give answers like Kaun Baneka Crorepati, okay? So therefore, you will have to demonstrate diligence and prudence, which is going to take a little bit of time. And people, depending on which side of the table they are, they're going to have opinions as to like, how we are responsive and all of that, right? So, one of the things that the function of HR continues to manage is the administrative, nuances are not getting taken away despite these kind of transactional roles are coming down, okay? So, what it is leading to is that people feel that the HR function is disconnected from the ground reality, okay? So, we can also be perceived as people who are slow, we lack empathy, fairness, and effectiveness, right? And in a single word, if I had to put it, people might feel that our roles are deeply rooted in bureaucracy, okay? So, while this might not be very accurate in most cases, there's a certain percentage of truth to this. Let's be honest, okay? So before we talk about future, let's talk about the present, okay? And what I'm talking about right now is about the present situation, okay? Largely based on the internal context of your organization, irrespective of your industry sector, irrespective of the maturity of your HR practice, right? There's a certain percentage of bureaucracy that still exists, okay? Okay? Now, the first shift Now we were talking about the history of HR profession. The first shift for HR profession started in late 1800s, right, when at the advent of Industrial Revolution. But the first shift almost happened 100 years later, and then the shifts have been happening every 2 decades, okay, from early 1900s, okay, mostly as an added incremental capability, right? As I said, personal plus IR to personal plus training plus IR, okay? So from there, right, that's how incrementally we've been progressing. But when it came to early 90s, okay, we see that we've had 6 stages of evolution of HR, and at the same time, the world had witnessed 5 major cycles of innovation and 3 cycles of industrial evolution, okay? This is to summarize that cusp, which is 1990s. In Pulkit's presentation, even when he touched upon the HR automation or HRMS, everything starts at 1990 if you see that, okay? So that is the crucial year that we have to link back to when we talk about the present, okay? So post the dot-com bubble, we entered into the VUCA world, right? I hope you all understand what VUCA world is, right? It was accelerating changes, it was bringing in with it a lot of disruptions and tectonic shifts in the way things are being done in a very, very unprecedented way. And the cycle of change became extremely constant. And what was also happening is that in most cases, it was non-linear. Until then, all these changes and progress was add-on, it was linear, and then suddenly it became non-linear. And the cycle time became shorter than before, right? So that's the main change that we started dealing with in the VUCA world. So the attention for a comprehensive view on the future of work started in mid-90s, okay? And the changes from late 90s started accelerating it. Now, that's where the whole HR business partnering and all of these things got added as nuts and bolts to the ecosystem that was created in early 90s. Now, what's happening is that there are 2 more levers that we need to discuss before we shift gears and move forward as to why I'm setting this context. So in 2010, Industry 4.0 from Industry 3.0, in a very short cycle of 20 years, okay, we had to shift again. And then in 2020, what happened is that the 6th innovation cycle kicked in, okay? So from 90, the next big milestone that I want you to focus as part of whatever I'm delivering to you today is 2020. So what happened in 2020? COVID. What's COVID? Black Swan event, as they call it, right? Okay. So we bid goodbye to VUCA, and then knowingly or unknowingly, we welcomed Bunny. What is Bunny? Okay, let me explain that to you. VUCA stood for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. This is the world that we lived in until 2020 from late 90s. Okay, from late 90s till 2020, we lived in this VUCA world. From there, we went into this Bunny world, which is brittle, which is anxious, which is non-linear, and which is incomprehensible. Now, why this is important? Why am I tracing this history? I'm tracing this because these 4 characteristics, brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible, are the 4 main characteristics that capture the very essence of the context that any business that you belong to today is entrenched upon. So for you to really understand what's changing around you, you need to first keep this larger context in mind, number 1. Okay, so I have two main takeaways for you from my opening remarks. Okay, so we're just getting warmed up, okay, and then we'll accelerate pretty fast. So though the function of HR has evolved since late 1800s, at the advent of Industrial Revolution, the current practices are largely entrenched upon what we created as the foundations at early 90s for the HR function, with some incremental change from there on. Number two is, it is time for us to understand that there are going to be some timeless basics, okay, which will remain intact. Okay, we need to identify them, okay, and pay attention equally to those legacy systems, legacy frameworks, which are not going to survive the test of the future. Okay, so these are the main two takeaways that I want to leave you with as part of my opening remarks. Okay, so what happened since 2020? Because we are now in the beginning, early 2025. So what's happened for the last 4 years? Okay, first thing that happened is supply chain disruptions. 2019, 1/3 of the world's manufacturing output was from China. Be it the cheapest, low-cost product to the most exquisite luxury good, China was the manufacturing capital of the world, right? And the entire supply chain got disrupted in 2020. Geopolitical uncertainty and deglobalization. So trade tensions between major global economies, such as US and China, Russia-Ukraine conflict, right, led to massive shifts in the global markets. So Indian businesses, how were they impacted? Because global trade agreements have an impact because you got to take sides sometimes, while we don't, okay? These sides are being forced upon countries, and these trade agreements, tariffs, sanctions, all of this affect exports, imports, foreign investments. So, and most importantly, the deglobalization got triggered because many countries started seeing that their economies were contracting. Okay? So therefore, there was fear, there was panic among people that governments must do something to protect their economy. Okay? And the third is the shifting consumer behavior and expectations. Now, sitting at home, people had only one option because their mobility was largely restricted, that they had to seek everything through internet, through devices. So what happened is that the consumer behaviors slowly started shifting, okay? And as the consumer behavior shifted, so did their expectations, right? So what happened is that companies suddenly had to figure out an omni-channel strategy, okay? Which means that you need to find a way your apps, your online, your offline stores, your physical presence at different touch points, and then your customer service, all of this kind of gets working seamlessly in a very integrated fashion, right? You cannot just be a company which is just digital or non-digital, right? So there were no binary options left to any organization anymore, okay? And the fourth one is disruptive business models, okay, and boom of startups. So sharing economy picked up, right? Because everyone started valuing, frugality suddenly, right? So people wanted options, right? People said, why should I own a car? Because one, it is not being affordable for me to own a car, right? Second, it is being practically impossible to own a car sitting in an urban place, right? How many of you have worked in Mumbai? Anyone who's worked in Mumbai? Okay. So in Mumbai, generally, even the biggest of the offices, okay, except very few people, the senior most people also don't get a parking. Therefore, how do they commute to their office? They commute by train, right? So that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? So suddenly people found these everyday problems as business opportunities and started creating solutions for that. So, another simple example that I'll give you. The competition was not coming from the very same industry. The competition was coming from elsewhere. Something that most of you might know, but I will still repeat it. Cadbury, Paris, okay, Lotte. Who are their competitors? What are these companies? Toffee makers. Okay, who are their competitors? The same companies that I told you? No. The competition landscape completely changed. Boom. What happened? Enter UPI payment. Right? So 161 rupees 95 paise. I scan and pay exactly that. What was I paying before? If I pay 200 rupees, that guy says, I don't have 5 rupees change, I don't have 7 rupees change, and gives you toffees for 7 rupees or gives you toffees for 2 rupees. So what happened? Suddenly, GPay, PhonePe, Paytm became the competition of toffee makers. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. Disruptive business models, boom of startups. Okay? Very simple things like that. Right? It might look very trivial, but suddenly if you look at it at the scale of the massiveness, especially in a country like India, it's huge. And now then extrapolate that at a global level. Rapid digitization and technology transformations. What was happening? The lockdown completely accelerated the dependency on technology for all people, right? And way beyond just being temporary, because people got hooked to it and you can't do anything about this now, okay? So those were the great resets that's loading since 2020. Now, the India story since 2020, because it's a little intricate, complex paradox. Okay, let's talk about it. Economic contraction, right? In 2020, suddenly, property prices fell, crashed, right? Things like hotel prices crashed, okay? Economy was shrinking. Suddenly, like, there was no availability of transport, logistics for people, okay? People struggled on a lot of fronts, so we all know those stories. So, people lost jobs. Okay, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, it had a huge impact, okay? And then the whole fear, panic around the death toll, the infection rates, all of this ensured that it again affects the consumer sentiments, okay? So therefore, all businesses, irrespective of, except a few, okay, they got simply disrupted there, okay, because there was no economic viability, okay? Then what happened? Revenge consumerism. Revenge travel, okay, destination weddings, all of these things suddenly started picking up because of the pent-up demand that was there, right? People felt like, how is that I am not able to do what I want to do? I don't care, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. So therefore, the pent-up demand created revenge consumerism. And anytime an economy contracts, when it comes back, it also is going to increase your inflation significantly. So what's happening is that today the real inflation, the way it is catching up with you in terms of be it the fuel inflation or food inflation is significantly high, right? So irrespective of the business that your organization is operating, okay, especially in India, this is one reality that your founder or your CEO or your CFO, these guys are navigating. So you need to be aware of that. Next is the manufacturing and supply chain realignment. The global supply chain revealed the vulnerability, right, to sudden shocks during this pandemic. So therefore, how do companies navigate the paradox of getting the advantage of single source buyers because economies of scale kicks in, right? And at the same time balance it to ensure that the supply chain doesn't get completely disrupted. Right? So this is one new paradox that got added since 2020. India as a country has got political stability for a very large part of time. So therefore, what happens? When you have political stability, you know the policy direction the country is going to take. Okay, there's some continuity in terms of the policy direction and there's some predictability to it. Okay, but at the same time, while the governments have been doing enough since 1990s onwards, whichever government, okay, to ease business, to kind of make things easier for, foreign investments to flow in, still, in the index of ease of doing business, we are nowhere where we have to be. right? So that's another challenge, okay? FDI contraction, okay? Because foreign direct investments, okay? When people look at it, China plus one strategy kicked in because of the whole supply chain disruption. But what happened is that there are cheaper alternative locations for manufacturing today, right? Take, for example, countries like Vietnam, okay? They offer super scalability, right? So therefore, FDI contractions. And then all this trade wars and everything creates things like tariffs for the country, right? Both in terms of bringing in raw material or finished goods, okay? The next part of the complex paradox that we're talking about is, on one side, we say there's been a huge demographic dividend, okay? India is a country with a huge, vast, young workforce. But at the same time, labor shortages. It's a real problem, okay? All of us are dealing with it. The second side, gig economy is booming, okay? The biggest employers today in the country are, when I studied in my GK book, it used to be Indian Railways, okay? Later it became TCS and all of those IT body shops. Now it is the Swiggies and Zomatos and Blinkits, all of them put together, right? So there's, on other side, a total boom of the gig economy. But on the other side, we are talking about unemployment. So as HR professionals, we got to navigate this paradox, right? So how do we kind of like find a solution to this, okay? If this is a problem, which means that the past legacies that we have created from 1990s may not be working anymore. That's where I'm getting to, right? You have to correlate back to that. So expanding domestic consumption. So in India today, new patterns of consumerism is coming up. But at the same time, affordability is also shrinking on the other side because of inflation. Okay, so how do you manage this, right? Last one is advanced tech infra. Now, many of our folks in India, okay, completely skip the queue in the, for example, let's say in the whole financial track, okay? So you start with cash transactions, then you have a bank account, then you go into a card, right? It can be a debit card, prepaid card, credit card, and then from there evolve. But we just skip this middle layer completely, and the masses straight away move to digital payments, okay? So simple example of that. Second is we got one of the cheapest and fastest internets, right? You travel internationally, you know, right? Whichever network you port back to, it's not as fast as the networks that we have here, okay? Imagine the whole immigration check-in, check-out process, right? Like one of the smoothest immigration process happens to happen in India, okay? Because in other places, the amount of paperwork and still like, their dependency on non-digital means that it's a very inconvenient process. So one side as a country, we have super advanced tech infrastructure, which is cheap and accessible. The smartphone penetration is actually higher than the penetration of sanitation in many places, okay? But on the other side, the physical infrastructure is still developing, right? Like for example, last week, the whole stampede and all of this, right? So which means that we still don't have the right physical infrastructure to kind of enable the masses, okay? So these are some of the paradoxes that we are navigating. I wanted to leave that as a thought to you. So what are the opportunities for organizations in India, okay? India as a country today is a leading voice in global geopolitical leadership, right? That's a huge plus. So therefore, when the China plus one strategy kicked in, okay, there's a huge benefit for India to leverage, right? And the next one is our equations on how we are managing our relationships with the other big economies, right? So that's another huge strength for us as a country, okay? And our country is also strategically located to service Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa, okay? The rising economies, okay? So therefore, we are strategically positioned geographically as a country. So therefore, this helps us, be it in terms of manufacturing output or export of services or export trade, all of this, like, there's a huge leverage and advantage we have there. Third is the human capital. We have a young workforce, okay, which can be leveraged. who's highly ambitious, highly aspirational, right? And they are very clear about what they want, okay? While they are aspirational, while they are ambitious, they are also very clear in their thought process as to what are their boundaries, okay? 2023 December, I was speaking at the National HRD, there's a HRD, Human Resource Development Conference for NHRDN, which happens every year at Delhi. So I was speaking there, and one of my fellow panelists, okay, she has a son who is about 25 years old. He's a law graduate, master's. So she said that after working for 6 months, he's taking a sabbatical. Okay, so that was unheard of. It was shocking for her because she says, like, almost 33 years, I have not thought about a break. This fellow has just worked for 6 months. I asked him what happened. He says, like, I need to go find my purpose. So I'm going to travel. Okay, and my company is okay. So they gave me a sabbatical for 6 months to go figure out. And after 6 months, if I don't fit into this whole scheme of fitting into a, law job, desk job at a corporate, I'm going to quit, maybe do something else different. So we have a human capital which is very different from the world that many of us might have come from, right? They are young, they are ambitious and aspirational, but at the same time, they clearly know what they want. Okay, rapid urbanization, government's focus on industrial growth, right? For another 3 decades, if India continues to keep the pace of the urban infrastructure, okay, we will definitely be at par with any other developed nation in terms of the advanced infrastructure at that point of time, right? And industrial growth. India is continuing to explore ways to make industrial growth accessible, easy. Laws are being simplified. Like, for example, this year in the budget, they ensured that the income tax law is simplified. Next, this code of wages is being worked upon. So a lot of things are being done to proactively ensure that structurally also people who come from outside can grow their industry, set up their business. And a large and growing consumer market. Our population is not going off anywhere, so which means that there's going to be a large base for domestic consumption. Okay, so these are the opportunities for the organization. At the same time, there are going to be equally challenges. Okay, fluctuating prices and trade uncertainty. Okay, for many of the manufacturing companies, many of your raw materials may not come from India. It might come from different countries. Okay, you might be geo-sourcing it. So if there's a trade uncertainty, if there is global geopolitical tensions in this bunny world, you are going to face with fluctuating prices, okay? So therefore, you do not know how you're going to control your product pricing, right? Very simple as that. Second is keeping pace with global competitiveness. I'll give you a simple example. I read an article where China has made it difficult for the Foxconn employees of China to travel to India because they know that the more they keep traveling, the more the knowledge keeps transferring, which means that today we are only assembling iPhones, so tomorrow we might soon be manufacturing iPhones. Okay? So, keeping pace with global competitiveness, one example of that, right? Complying with regulatory changes. Okay? I wouldn't want to go too much deep into it because we all know how this works in terms of our bureaucracy. Okay? Next is quality of education and skill levels. Okay? Much has been spoken about industry-academia collaboration, but we know whether it's working for us or not. Next is the unpredictability and risk management that comes not only for India, but for organizations across the globe. Last is, even if a company is willing to invest in overhauling their legacy and their systems, okay, their infrastructure and automation, the kind of capital that has to be deployed, right? And then once you become more sophisticated with automation and connectedness of machines, then you have to also manage cybersecurity risks, okay, then which means additional capex has to be deployed, okay? So, and not the least to say, most of us wake up from bed and today we don't go to wash our face and brush, but many of us probably is first looking at FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, don't know what I missed out. And then probably like this, you're walking, figuring out where your wash basin is, right? So, and the last thing you do before night is not to kiss your children good night, but you're kind of like looking at phone, okay? So what happens is tech overload, okay? It's a very real thing. Okay, and that also has an impact on the workplaces. Okay, so these are some of the challenges that are going to be faced by organizations. I'm trying to give personal examples so that we can connect back to what's happening there. Now, global evolution of work, what's happening in this is 3 things are happening. The work is changing, the workplace is changing, the workforce is changing. Okay, what's changing in work? Since 2020, including IT services, I have a few colleagues here, you've been asked to do more with less, right? It's been there in manufacturing, it's now there in tech, it's there in every industry now, okay? Next is, it's a constantly connected workspace, okay? Be it machines, be it the workspace, right from the security gate to every other single place, right? Every single activity, it's a connected workplace. Next is, workplaces are becoming more open. Earlier, people never used to share information because they felt that as long as they had the information with themselves, they were very powerful in the system. They had a dependency, okay? Today, the work requires them to share and collaborate so that they can give the desired outcome. And last, the human-machine interface, right? Increasingly, we're talking about cobots and all of that. So the work is changing. The workplace is changing. HR systems were very rigid, right? So we had policies. Policy meant policy, okay? Today, we're talking about hyper-personalization. Hierarchies are broken, and today we're talking about networks at work and flat structures. It was very interesting to read a LinkedIn post day before yesterday from a HR colleague. He said for the first time he was shocked when he entered into his current organization where he's been working, I think, for about 6 months, where he was told that he has no reporting manager. He had a JD, he was told what he had to do. There's no reporting manager to monitor you. You got to do what you're supposed to do. You're just monitored on outcomes. And how that outcomes get monitored is very different from having a human interface there. So breaking off the hierarchical structures. From silos to collaboration, right? Much has been spoken about this, so I will not take too much of time in detailing it out. And from work as a transaction, today people are demanding an experience because everything today is an experience for them. We are in an experience economy, so therefore, what they expect at workplace is also an experience. The last is the workforce. The workforce is becoming T-shaped, okay? Imagine T, capital T, right? So there is a broad range of competencies that everybody across the organization certificate at all. There are enough and more online assessment tools that can really test you on real-time basis, what's your skill proficiency level, and deploy you at the right projects, right? So skill and expertise rather than credentials. Gig-based. So many of the super specialist skills are going to be either gig-based or fractal. As to how transactional work is also getting gig-based, the super specialist work is also going to get either gig-based or fractal. I had a friend who tried to become a fractal CHRO in 2016, and he failed in that model, okay, way before, much ahead of its time, I think. But today, there are many companies that are offering fractal CTO, fractal CMO, fractal CHRO, right, fractal CFO. So we are going into a fractal mode of work. And the multi-generational requirement means that unless and until you hyper-personalize, if you remain rigid, you're not going to survive as an organization, right? So this is the evolution that we see in work, workplace, and workforce, okay? So how do we make sense of this, okay? First thing, HR leaders must start looking at things from a work perspective, from an optimization lens, rather than just a pure cost lens, okay? The second thing is, it is essential to monitor today, but how do you ensure that you navigate through the paradox of not over-monitoring to the level where you enter into privacy intrusion, right? And third thing is how, because the work is connected, how as a HR leader you're going to be driving digital transformation, right? Next is the workplace. The design thinking versus policy policing, right? So this is another hat you have to wear, right? Can you become a design thinker rather than a policy police, okay? Can you reimagine roles? I was talking to the chief AI scientist of HROne, okay? So he was telling how today some of the roles are getting decompartmentalized even at the CXO levels. Like he said, for example, earlier, companies used to have one person called a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. Then those guys said, we are not CTO, okay, there are two people, Chief Security Officer, Information Security Officer, or Chief Security Officer, CISO, and then what? CDO, Chief Digital Officer, okay? And now today, they say the role is further got split up where there are even Chief AI Officers because AI is carved out separately from digital because it is very strategic to many of the businesses, right? Now, if HR cannot take lead in reimagining these roles, reimagining these hierarchies, reimagining these structures to execute ultimately the strategy at its best, because these strategies keep changing at the spin of the wheel, right? If we are not so proactive, then we are asking for trouble. Understanding the interplay between collaboration tools, collaboration spaces, and a community way of working, right? While IT companies might have got much more mature with this, there's still enough space for organizations in other spaces like manufacturing and other services to really improve on this. And then, one thing I've hated being part of these WhatsApp HR communities for HR professionals is that, irrespective of seniority, people randomly, like posting a prompt to ChatGPT, ask, hey, can someone share with me your compensation policy? What? In what context? Right? So, lift and shift has been going on for a very long time. We just take this. We are very good at two things: Control C, Control V. Okay? So, rather than lifting and shifting, okay, we need to focus on fostering an authentic culture which is very, very true to your purpose, true to the meaning of your existence, of your organization. Because what is going to be very, very important is the context of your organization. The context is going to be the king. So this is on workplace. Now quickly moving to workforce. The HR leaders have to build multidisciplinary teams. Okay? Now the reason why I asked how many of you are CHROs and non-CHROs is, if you're really aspiring to be that top 1%, you need to understand, what it takes to be the 1% of the future. Okay? So that's what the session is all about. So first is, you got to be very good at building multidisciplinary teams. Okay? So there was a nice video of somebody orchestrating something, right? So HR has to be the person who brings people, a talent Sherpa, people, you're going to be the person who brings people together to orchestrate for success, for results. Next is continuous learning from an expansive learning ecosystem, okay? LMS is a passe, right? LXPs are a passe, because today you got to really figure out how you're going to create a much broader ecosystem for people to learn, so that you're not just punching total learning hours as part of your monthly report, okay? But rather talking about what is the impact it is making to your bottom line of the organization. And the next one is start looking at work contracts in a very, very flexible way and model, okay? This happened in, this example was given to me by a friend who was leading the Mercer India practice a while ago. She was telling that in Singapore, they headhunted a person from India who was a super specialist within a specific domain of banking, okay? So like they wanted to offer him a full-time job. He said, I cannot take this job. Why? he said, me and my wife had decided to take the parenting responsibility split equally between us, so which means that your job requirement is not compatible to my domestic obligations. So they were scratching their head as to what to do. He said, don't worry, my wife is also from the same domain. Okay, you give us both the role, you split it into two. Okay, I take one half of the role, she takes another half of the role. Now, in a highly regulated environment like a banking, the CHRO made it happen. And those couple went to Singapore, okay, and today this is the reality of a nuclear family sometimes. So you got to really think flexible contracts to deploy talent, okay? So, and the last and most important thing is to ensure that there's a constructive feedback culture, okay? In our emphasis for feedback, what we have ensured is that in many places, unknowingly, we have created a very destructive, criticizing, critiquing, toxic feedback culture, okay? And people are not today in a Barney world with so much of anxiety, brittleness, and all of this around, not going to take it in the right spirit. They're just going to, there's something called as quiet quitting and all of that started happening since pandemic. So those are the realities. So we need to marry all these factors back to these realities that's around us. So now for a second, let's take a moment to pause and reflect in this evening. Should we fix, as HR people, what's not broken? Because what started in 1990 is still working brilliantly for us. Why fix something that's not broken? The second thing that you got to think is the battleground has already changed from a VUCA to a Barney, and VUCA didn't exist even at 1990. Okay, it came much later. We tried to find creative ways to add nuts and bolts to the systems. We've come to a completely new ecosystem. The battleground has completely shifted. But what is our playbook? What is our template of operating HR? Has that changed? What is the compass that you can use if you know that your journey is going to happen, but you're not sure about the destination? So this is something that HR leaders have to seriously introspect and contemplate to start adding value in their respective organizations. So how is the role of the HR, especially the CHRO, changing or evolving, right? So no more HR leaders can operate in silo as just HR leader. They are expected to be part of the business, not as order takers, but as part of somebody who can deliver business strategy, okay? And when I'm saying this, I'm being extremely authentic about this because almost 2 decades of my career throughout has been in change and transformation. And in every single organization, right from the beginning of my career, forget the CHRO, I was expected to deliver this. So which means that that's much more true today in the role where I am, right? Next is paradox navigator. I gave you a lot of paradoxes, right? Conflicting things. Like for example, we said, one side we have labor shortage, other side a gig economy boom. Okay, one side we are saying the abundance of talent is there, but on the other side there is unemployment, right? One simple paradox. How do you have clarity of thought to navigate through these paradoxes, right? To cut to the chase. Tech and transformation catalyst. October 2024, I was talking to a CHRO friend of mine. He said, forget the HRMS and all these HR tools. He said, the SAP HANA implementation in his company was led by him, not by the CIO, not by the CFO. Why? Because his his chairman told him, this is not about deploying technology. This is about change management. And change management has to be led by the CHRO of the company. So you are the principal sponsor of the project, right? So that's how the template is changing, okay? tech and transformation catalyst, right? Forget only about the tech from a workplace, workforce context, right? But in the broader context also, you're supposed to have a greater appreciation of technology. Interdisciplinary collaborator, right? The silos are broken. Today, I spend equal amount of time, and I prefer that this will change. In my organization, I spend equal amount of time between my team, reviewing my teams, and my conversation with my CXO colleagues. But ideally, as the transformation and change in my company progresses and matures, I will be spending less amount of time with my team and more time with my CXO colleagues to really understand how HR will be continuing to up its game to deliver that value interdisciplinarily, right? And the last point is Chief Wellbeing Officer. Since COVID, right? So we're talking about, somebody spoke about financial well-being, right? So 2018, I still remember the year, we did a wellness conference in Chennai, right? It was totally unheard of for the HR professionals. We said the future of work is all about employee well-being. And back then, we still spoke about physical well-being, basic financial well-being, okay? Today, mental well-being is a very, very crucial topic. There are, in this list, I can just take this slide and extrapolate and give you another 100 points as to how the whole CHRO role in itself has changed. I'm just leaving you with the top 5 of my laundry list here. And then, I would like to leave you with this quote before I conclude my session and then open up for Q&A. The future-ready CHRO is somebody who will embrace innovation. Because if we are stuck with a rule book mindset, we are not going to be the CHRO of the future. So first is to embrace innovation, embrace design thinking, lead with empathy. People, if you have to hyper-personalize, and for hyper-personalization to really work for you, you got to be really on top of your game on empathy. And be very clear that you are actually driving business impact. Thank you.
A big thank you, Lionel Paul David, for your propelling insights. Thank you so much, sir.